So we just saw the Willits house, which was the first Prairie Style house. And it's a style that is very typical for Franklin Lloyd Wright, and particularly his early career. So where does this style come from, and what was characteristic about it?
Okay, so here's our Ward Willett house, and we can sort of make a list. So, again, we start with the Villa Rotunda by Palladio, 1500s, puts the human being in the center to survey out. And here we've got a asymmetry, open plan, and hearth in the center. So the Prairie Style is a group of architects, including Franklin Lloyd Wright. There are others sort of working in this genre. You'll find books describing all of them. They were in the Midwest, particularly around Chicago in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it's related to craftsman style, which was a way of sort of respecting the craftsman, a little bit related to the English arts and crafts movement. So it's all sort of brings that all together. And we can make a list. So open plan, we'll go into a lot of detail about that. Massive chimney core. So we've got the hearth. We're going to pin this down and have a place of identity for the family. Interpenetration of inside and outside. So the whole wall just opens up here. Low sloped overhanging roofs and that are a cantilever, putting the upper floor in shadow so that it makes the building seem like one story instead of two story. Rectilinear interpenetrating planes. The walls seem to slide by each other. Horizontality, a sense of motion, moving across the prairie. The American unrootedness, continuous motion. The favorite American novel is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Takes place in a raft on the Mississippi River. Most important American novel is Moby Dick. Takes place on a ship in constant motion. And then the most heart-rending American novel is The Great Gatsby. This kind of social attempt at social mobility, where Gatsby wants to move into this upper class. And then asymmetry. So that's our list. Those are the characteristics. So key building is the Roby House. We'll look at that in a few minutes. And Ward Willits. So open plan, spaces flowing, massive chimney core, interpenetration of a whole wall opening up, interpenetration of inside and outside. Bands of windows, low-sloped overhanging roofs, putting the upper floor in shadow. So this is actually a three-story house, but it almost looks like a one-story house. Rectilinear interpenetrating planes, these walls sliding by each other. Horizontality, a sense of motion. There's even a point here, the prow of a ship moving across the prairie. Asymmetry. So what is the meaning of this? We're going to go into this some detail as the course unfolds, but here we identify Palladio with humanism. The human being is the central and most important thing, separate from and above nature. And this idea carries right into the 20th century. Here we are in 1938-41, National Gallery by John Russell Pope, very much in this style. Franklin Lloyd Wright is already in his third period at this point, but a lot of people still hanging on to the centralized humanist notion. And Wright's rejecting that for the human being moving, becoming a part of nature and moving with nature around the asymmetrical house. So, the meanings: American individuality, freedom, and opportunity, open to new ideas, meritocracy, lack of class restrictions, movement, freedom, flux, and change, the American movement westward. So Wright feels we are unique individuals whose purpose is to fulfill our potentials. I believe that every man born had equal right to grow from scratch by way of his own power, unhindered to the highest expression of himself possible to him. So, how does the Prairie Style reflect American values? Do we still have these values today? We have students from all over the world. So how do you think of America? And is what we just looked at the way you think of America? If not, how differently?
Oh, I wish American architecture today was as good as Frank Lloyd Wright's design at that time. And what strikes me is when you compare the classical Palladian villa and this kind of late Renaissance design that wasn't necessarily designed with like human proportions, human scale, but it was designed according to golden ratio, symmetrical, and the divine proportions, all right, as they used to call it, the divine ratio. And at the same time, we have Frank Lloyd Wright and his abstract design. So in both projects, it's quite interesting that we don't necessarily see the scale, like the human scale in the projects. And his plans, if we look at his architecture, it's very hard to grasp the size of a building just by looking at it, because it's so dematerialized. And as you mentioned a few times, in many of the projects, he creates the impression that a two-story house is actually one story. If we look at the Robbie house, there are these like horizontal lines that are in so many different levels, so we don't know necessarily where one floor starts, when another floor stops, and so on. So in a way, the same abstraction that we see in his drawings or his design for the glass windows, the same abstraction we see for the plans, the sections, and the facades of his building. So is there anything about this abstraction? Was it intentional for him? Was he trying to break up with the tradition, or he was more trying to align himself and follow up?
Well, I think you're right when you say that it's hard to get a sense of the scale. And hopefully a lot of our students at some point, you know, when you're in America, you want to make sure, get to Buffalo. And we're going to see the Martin House in a few minutes. I'm sorry, in a few lectures. But one of the things is how small a lot of these houses are. And
right.
you know, very, and some of them, you know, quite expensive. So they could have been bigger. But he wants this to force this horizontality, to not that you be like this, but you be like this. And people have cynically said Wright was very short, maybe
right.
about 5'4", 5'5". And so I said, well, he designed the houses for himself.
Right, not for the client, right?
Right. So it's not always clear. But I would respond this way. We see when people get to America, they really don't just stay in New York. They really do get around America now. And so hopefully when our students visit here, get to Chicago, get to Buffalo, visit these houses, and get a sense for yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I look forward to the next ones.
Great.